Ian West. I'm here, I'm the host for this evening. Got a couple of my fellow speakers who I'll introduce in a minute. And I say welcome to this evening's talk on the Enterprise Architect. This session is recorded just to make you aware. And in terms of the event format for this evening, we'll be doing some presentations around the Artisan EA, what they are, and how they support organisations and enterprises, followed by an interactive Q&A. If you want to raise any questions along the way, there's a Q&A session to put any questions in there. And in addition, there's a chat window if you want to chat to your fellow attendees. Also, we're on social media. So if you're looking for putting something on Twitter, there's BCS EASG and hashtag of Artisan EA. In terms of our speakers this evening, there's myself, Ian West. I'm a member of the EA specialist group, practising Enterprise Architect, and been doing this for a number of years in terms of specialist around enterprise architecture and solution architecture. Kingsley, did you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thanks, Ian. Hi, everybody. I'm Kingsley, as Ian just mentioned there. So currently I operate as a CTO for a digital agency based in London. Experiences go from 25 years plus. I won't give the real kind of years away here. Covering a variety of roles, focusing mainly on software engineering and development, less on the architect side. So I do feel like I'm slightly a fraud into this this evening. But again, hopefully the things I will discuss later will bring the relevance to it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kingsley. And Gabrielle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gabrielle Liddy. I'm an enterprise architect also, have been for a number of years in a number of different organisations. And I'm just sort of generally interested in sort of theory and practice and how we sort of incorporate being an enterprise architect into sort of working in a large organisation with all the excitement that brings. So. Okay, thanks, Gabrielle. So moving on. So really setting the scene, who is this Artisan Enterprise Architect that we're going to talk about this evening? So this is the fourth in a series of talks that I've done around different styles or types of enterprise architecture, which I've kind of boiled down into four different personas. And each of those personas does a variety of different activities, whether that's around planning, whether that's around design, and whether that's around governance. And if you're interested in knowing more about these previous talks, they can be found on YouTube under the BCS community channel. If I look at the four, just in terms of summary, give you a bit of context around what we're talking about. The first one I've talked about previously was the corner shop EA. Often enterprise architecture isn't associated with small, medium businesses, but in this case, I was sort of putting forward the position that actually as an enterprise architect, we have great skills that apply not just to large organizations, but also to kind of those small, medium businesses, even applying them to things like startups, scale ups, and things like charities and that. So really where the corner shop EA is, they specialize in providing those skills to the smaller client, if you look at it that way. And in terms of that kind of planning, design, governance, very much a spread, even spread across the three, with no particular specialist in any space, and very much responding to the client's needs and what they do. The next one we had a chat about was the ivory tower enterprise architect, something that perhaps a lot of enterprise architects are accused of being very often is being sitting in their ivory tower, kind of telling everybody what to do, but not really taking too much responsibility about it getting delivered. In terms of the ivory tower EA, actually, it does play a place in the enterprise. And at times, actually, the desire is to have somebody who can perhaps help you with that kind of blue sky thinking that actually is a bit disconnected from the organization and can kind of drive strategy in a way that if you were involved in the daily activities of the organization, that you would not be as effective in that ivory tower EA. And so again, if I look at those kind of three elements of it, very much in that planning space of the ivory tower EA, where they're looking at kind of developing strategic roadmaps, as I say, that blue sky thinking and kind of challenging the status quo of the organization. less so in the design and governance, which is probably where they get that bad reputation for not engaging with the delivery teams and that. The next one was the town planner EA, and I called it town planner because it's very much like a small town or a county or something, where they're very much worried more about, well, what's going on within my town? So cataloguing what's happening, understanding where that's working well, where that's not working so well, and coming up with perhaps plans, strategies, approaches to make improvements, very much like a town planner would. And so you typically see this enterprise architect working perhaps with senior management, looking around, trying to find areas of improvement, and I say very often doing cataloguing of the environment, but then in turn, as those plans take shape and they move forward, moving more into kind of a governance role, making sure that those plans stay on track and that actually they provide the structure needed to keep those plans on track. And so you see the town planner EA operating very much in that planning space, but also backing that up with a lot of governance as well to make sure that those plans are being realised. And the final one in this series that we're going to talk about today is the Artisan Enterprise Architect. Now, the Artisan EA isn't actually an artisan themselves. That's very much the teams that they work with. Could that be sets of developers, engineers, change teams, even our business colleagues who are those SMEs. And I kind of call them the artisan, but the Artisan EA works very closely with those teams to help deliver designs and change into the organisation. So when we look at that kind of profile of the Artisan EA, less about kind of upfront planning and delivery, just providing enough context to move forward. But as those designs evolve and grow into the organisation, they're there in person to help guide and steer the development. So therefore, there's quite a lot of governance involved in this, but also a kind of listening activity to make sure that as those solutions evolve, that they can respond and adapt with them. And that could be something as straightforward as the design proposes that you may implement a certain kind of technology. As you start evolving that, you find out it's not quite the right place, and then you can flex and change. And because you've got the architect with you, it can be done very rapidly. Or it could be something like a piece of business change where you've done some organisational design and you're implementing that organisational change, and you find certain bits of it don't quite gel as you would expect. Again, that architect can be very close to the teams, the change teams, and help them flex in a way that would not have been possible if you'd been operating as one of those other enterprise architects. And so if you then take that Artisan EA and kind of put it into a persona, as it were. So from a description point of view, we talk about the EA working closely with leadership teams to define the design vision and to guide and implement the development of that design. Whilst they're there, they can help maintain that vision and adapt to emerging opportunities and challenges. And I think that's the kind of key here with this role, is it's a very flexible role because of where it's operating. And when we talk about leadership, that could be at a director level, but actually working down. We've got Kingsley here as a CTO who has experience of working in those kind of environments, and also Gabrielle, who's going to talk more about how she as an enterprise architect can operate in that space. And so the motivation you get for being that person, and really here I'm talking about me as an architect, why would I want to be the Artisan EA rather than some other kind? Well, actually, I get to own the vision, I get to maintain that design vision, so I can see it through to the end. So that's quite a satisfying activity. And also because I'm hands-on, I get to see that design evolve and grow around me.
and I can exploit opportunities as they arise. So my design hasn't been fixed 6, 12, 18 months ago. It's evolving on a daily basis. And so actually it's quite an exciting, if challenging place. And I say, whilst I can exploit those opportunities, where those challenges appear, I can also respond to those quickly. So if something's not working correctly, I'm there on hand to help adapt and change it. And finally, it encourages that collaborative teamwork, in which I think as organisations we love to see nowadays. We often talk about agile with a capital A and having teams to do that. The Artisan EA is definitely that kind of EA who would kind of relish working in kind of those more agile, flexible environments. The benefits to that, what are the benefits to our clients? Well, actually, they get to maintain the design vision. So they're not given something which can be adapted and changed as it goes through the development pipeline. You've got someone there to keep it on track. It also means that you can that the client can be confident that it's responding to as the organisation grows or changes and adapts, because actually organisations don't stand so still nowadays. And actually they're getting that team collaboration again, something which a lot of people are seeing as very important to success nowadays. And the clients for the Artisan EA, they span the whole organisation from the C-suite through the business leaders, program management, could be CTOs, could be development teams, etc. And let's not perhaps think of this person as just working in a single project. You can have change which could be quite organisationally impacting perhaps a division or a company structure being put into place, or a major program where the Artisan EA can operate in this space just as effectively, whether that's kind of business change or more technical data. It's not restricted to any one space to do that. And so finally, if you're kind of that Artisan EA and you want to provide these services, you're going to be much more about design side of architecture, scheduling those designs. How do you break it down into those small chunks and work with people to move it forward and provide that oversight to the implementation, which means that actually you can exploit those opportunities, you can rise to those challenges, and you can maintain that vision moving forward. So that's what I describe as the Artisan EA in terms of a persona and who they are. I'm now going to hand across to Gabrielle, who has experience working in this space and can provide a bit more, I suppose, hands-on experience or personal experience about working like this. You right there, Gabrielle?
Yep. Sorry, just changed. When I got the keyboard, I lost the unmute.
Oh, okay.
Hey, so it turns out that I've probably done all of those different roles that Ian has just described, and all the different things. And it's interesting to think, what am I doing now? And I guess the thing that I'm doing now really is this Artisan EA thing. I think this picture is pretty good because it kind of, you can use it for all of the different EA roles, but you just look at it differently. And I guess that's what happens, doesn't it, when you start a new job and you go to the job interview and it all seems pretty good, and then you get there and you find out what it really is. And that can be a surprise, but I guess you have to plan to be surprised in any new job. So I think one of the reasons why you end up being an Artisan EA is because there maybe isn't too many enterprise architects in the organization. So you can end up getting involved across a number of different things. And you see that people have got vague ideas that kind of, they need your assistance to kind of bring into a sort of plan so that you can see how different things fit together, because everyone's got a different idea. They all know what their bit's going to look like, but they don't know how it's going to fit together. And that's your job, is to sort of to see how things are going to fit together, and to mention to people that, you know, this has got to, we are going to be integrating things, and we do need to figure out how that's going to be done in a fairly sort of cost-effective and also you know, convenient way, because you want to sort of move forwards with what your sort of application landscape is doing. You can also have the idea that you're working with stakeholders that are a bit vague about technology. Perhaps they have read something in a magazine, or they have seen something and they think it's going to, they've seen it on their phone. If this works when I use my phone, this sort of great stuff happens. Why doesn't it happen at work? And so they can sort of be like where I am at the moment. Everyone would sort of quite like to get moving on with artificial intelligence. They really would, but they don't want to ever have to fill in a form to, provide metadata. So it's kind of like we're skipping over a number of different iterations. Also, you can, one of the sort of good uses of being an artisan EA is working with unreliable data. Now, because people haven't kept any sort of metadata. And so you sort of want to start doing some sort of data sciencey type stuff and seeing how things work together. But the data that you've collected perhaps isn't too good. It's not reliable. It turns out that people have chosen the first option in the drop downs for what business that you're dealing with, and it turns out everything is an abattoir, and you haven't got too many other businesses. I've seen that happen. You think, how many abattoirs are there in this country? Not that many. So some of the legacy applications you've got can be very old also, like really old. And that's, as an enterprise architect, it's kind of your job to make sure that those ones aren't forgotten and that you can integrate to them, and that we haven't got too many people who've been given a second screen, because that's the best way of, copying and pasting data from one system to another. Also, it can turn out that you're the only enterprise architect in an organization, and you're just alone, and you're having to, like, the plan, you can't do everything. So you have to get involved and make sure people are working to the design that they've come up with. And I suppose what you're doing is managing uncertainty overall. So you're sort of having to be ready with the new thing that happens when it turns out that somebody has bought some new bit of software and they want to integrate it in, but that capability that software applies to turns out to already have quite a number of options. So this uncertainty is the thing that you have to be comfortable with. And I guess if you're the sort of person that likes to keep a list of jobs to do and likes to tick things off that list and to see that sort of progress that way and jobs ticked off, probably you don't want to be an artisan EA, I'd have thought. You maybe want to, look in a different path. Okay, let's move on. So what do you do? So I don't know if any of you have heard of this notion of the architecture elevator that Gregor Hoff writes about. This screen looks a bit hilarious, doesn't it? So he talks about the architecture elevator. So you sort of get out and about. So the Lloyd's building is a good sort of metaphor for that, with that big lift on the outside of the building. So, up at the top floor, you've got your strategy and dreamers people, and down at the bottom, you've got your development teams. And in between, you've got all these other different roles, and your job is to make sure you make a visit to all these different teams, different floors occasionally, to make sure you've got some notion of business capability, so that you sort of know where you're sitting all the time, and that also about the products and where they're going, and that that it would be really lovely to have some form of governance, even if it's fairly notional, but you really need to have a list of what you've got. So with those sort of tools, you can sort of go up and down the elevator and say to people, do you know that have you thought about what that capability means? And often they haven't. So it's good to at least have a notional idea of the capabilities, and also a notional idea of the different applications you've got and what functionality they have. Because you've probably seen it, that you've got 17 fantastic applications with multiple functionalities, but you only use this bit of that one and this bit of this other one, and next thing you've got a budget of £100 million and nobody knows what to do. So you have to sort of keep a notion of all that, and that you kind of compile as you go along over the sort of the months and years, and then you can sort of see where projects fit in and how they can work. So that, for me, that's the sort of the key to being in it, to sort of have that idea of the elevator going up and down. But it's important to visit the top occasionally and sort out those strategy people who are making things up, I guess. Right. Sorry, this is not moving on. There we are. Okay, so how do you stop it? How do you stop things from falling down? I think you have to be really confident. You just have to sort of smile and say, okay, I'll think about it. Don't just say no. I mean, I think we can get into the position within an IT department in a business that's not really about, you know, where IT is. I mean, I work in a law firm and IT is not the main part of the business. It's very much in the sort of basement level, really, in terms of excitement. But people ask things, and I think we have to be careful that we don't end up just saying no to everything, because often you just want to say no. No, you can't do that. No, you can't do that. But in fact, you have to sort of say, let's have a look and see if we can make that happen. And you have to be aware that you can be quite dogmatic as an architect. You know about how things work. You've been doing this for 20 or 30 years. So you sort of think you know how to go things. So it's really, I think, important to sort of say, maybe I can learn too, to have a sort of younger mentor in the development team, maybe who can sort of reverse mentor you into, newer things and how they work. I mean, a lot of people are a bit vague on how the cloud stuff works, and they can in fact just end up moving on-prem stuff into cloud, and that's not what's supposed to happen. And yet I'm seeing that sort of thing does happen. And I think an important thing about being an Artisan EA is not aiming for sustainability. You're aiming for adaptability. And there's a bit of a difference there, which I think is about saying, well, things are going to change. We all know that. They're going to change. We're going to get new stuff in. The way that technology is changing at the moment is just so fast. I think you're going to help yourself more if you're not sort of thinking about trying to be sustainable, because that implies you're staying the same. But with adaptability, you're sort of thinking, well, how can we change to make this all better? And then I think it's very good to keep in mind some of the theory. I mean, you may not be a big fan of TOGAF. I know most people aren't really, but if you did that qualification, you worked really hard to get it. And it's good to be able to sometimes think, this is what I'm doing in relation to TOGAF or some other framework that you learnt about, just to keep in your mind that, that's the theory. And what am I doing in my practice? Like, am I ever looking at the architecture vision? Am I ever sort of checking that I've got a, architecture sort of, I've got some catalogs of things that we can refer to, and to try and sort of keep some of that thing happening along so that you can gradually build stuff up over the years. Because, in 2 years, you can create a whole lot of artifacts for yourself that will be really useful in terms of architecture, building blocks and things. And, it doesn't have to happen in the first week or the first month or even in the first year, but gradually you'll acquire a lot of things. And it just makes you look smart when people can say, do you know how these things link together? And you say, I do. And here it is. It's, it builds trust in you, and it builds confidence that when you say something and you said it with a smile and you've taken on board comments of other people have made, that you can be believed, and people will let you go ahead with doing what you want. But you always have to remember that you're always the one who's doing it. So it is you, and you bring your history with you, and you have to work with that. So maybe you don't have a confident smile. What have you got instead? Maybe you tend towards dogmatism, but what are you going to do instead? So you have to sort of, these are my tips. How are you going to translate that into your own practice? So that's my thing. Everyone's a bit different, and everybody does this job in a slightly different way, but that's what makes enterprise architecture kind of a good thing to do it. It's good to come along to these sort of functions and hear how other people manage, because it's a sort of, you probably don't get to network with too many peers in your workplace. So it's nice to hear other people talking in some session like this. Right, well, that's me.
Okay, thanks, Gabrielle. So moving forward, we've now got Kingsley to talk about his experience as a CTO. You're definitely not a fraud this evening, Kingsley. I could assure you of that. And I think it's really interesting to hear the perspective from somebody, I suppose, who sits on the receiving end of the architecture skills.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks. As Ian said there, I'm talking about basically alignment of EA to kind of the software development delivery lifecycle, which, for me has been an interesting journey, having delivered software products over the last 25 plus years, you know, and working with kind of enterprise architects in various forms. It's really an interesting journey. And so I'm going to share some of that with you now, hopefully. There you go. So I use this as, you know, really based on my experiences, and please nobody be offended by the fact of I'm going to put every single enterprise architect on the call, basically on the rack. It's not going to happen. But it's almost this real stigma that kind of Ian mentioned as well earlier, where, you know, historically, with probably legacy approaches and experience in some organizations where the EAs or the enterprise architects were seen as the evil, the no people that, you know, everyone kind of detests, and the software delivery team were like, you know, we're rock stars, we're great. We hate everything that EAs are talking about, governance and frameworks, and you can't do this, you can't do that. It's almost like put them on the torture, rack them and do that. And it's really not about that. For me, it's about, well, okay, some of them may be on the rack, but anyway, it's more about the understanding about, well, what is EA and how does it relate to kind of that software delivery, the life cycle, and the things we're trying to build it from a product or services point of view as well. So there's some key things, you know, of my experiences that I can kind of pinpoint, and it's not all of them in terms of what software delivery development teams really want. You know, I kind of mentioned that previous slide where some of them think they want to be rock stars, and a lot of it is about, and this is developers, you know, test engineers, BAs, etc. You know, kind of want to feel that they're important, that they have a voice and they can be heard. And there's a few things as well, you know, ownership and autonomy. It's great when they're producing a product or a service for the company, organization that they're in, or another organization where actually they have a sense of ownership, that they can put their stamp on it, have some level of autonomy to do that, rather than being, I'm being creative, I'm an engineer, a developer, I want to try this thing, but actually you see this big red flag of an EA in front of you saying, no, 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 you can't, you need to follow this. And it's almost like, well, that's not really going to let me do my job. It goes into kind of value and self-worth. You know, I've been at organizations where there has been this very no EA, let's put it that way, a group of EAs where people's own worth of a delivery team felt that actually they lost value in themselves. They're very intelligent, very creative developers, engineers who, because of the current kind of culture, let's say, they just didn't feel valuable in what they do. For some dev teams, they just want a clear vision and direction. They just kind of want to know, actually, what is the bigger picture here? Sometimes they've just been narrowed into, well, actually, build this, deliver that, and not really having that wider context or appreciation. They want validation and collaboration. I think Ian mentioned this on a slide earlier, and Gabrielle mentioned it as well, in terms of, you know, that collaboration part is so critical. You know, dev teams by their very nature are teams and kind of want to work with each other's disciplines to produce these really extraordinary products. You know, for me, it's almost like, you know, it's a team sport. It's not a single thing to be done. And that validation from the team actually produces great software products and services. So what do you mean by SDLC? And that was the term at the beginning. And I'm sure people on the call are all familiar with kind of the software development lifecycle. And this is just, I've taken the 5-stage approach. There are different versions of this. There are, you know, enhancements to this, but I thought I'd give it a simplistic view just to kind of lay some foundations. You know, from requirements, design, development, testing, and deployment. They're kind of the core pillars, have been around since the age of time, of software delivery at least, and they're kind of well known and well trodden. And, you know, it's very linear at the moment, but it is obviously a cycle, hence life cycle. And one of the things over my, you know, number of years is kind of layering on what I've kind of termed here, this secure SDLC processes. And one of the things that really come to light for me is that when you look at some of these things, such as, you know, requirements, risk analysis, compliance analysis, threat modeling, architecture risk, governance guidelines, it's almost, you can see it's kind of teetering on some of kind of the things that enterprise architects will actually relate to and say, oh, actually, that's quite interesting. Oh, actually, I'll think about that in my framework or my governance models. And these things have been seeping into kind of the overarching software delivery lifecycle over time. So actually, for me, this alignment of the EA to the software delivery lifecycle is a natural progression. And in my experiences, is what's produced the most outstanding results of product services that I can probably name today. So it is really, really, really important. So why do we need to align, or enterprise architects to align to software delivery lifecycle? And this slide, you know, a bit contentious, but it's kind of reality that I've seen over time. You know, this is kind of sometimes what happens with software delivery teams when they're trying to deliver something and the EA says, no, you can't have it. There's this rust, there's this fight, there's this tussle, there's this, I'm not saying which one's the architect in this picture and which one's the delivery team, you know, make up your own minds about that. But there is this real fight where the team's trying to deliver, I don't know, a product or a service for an internal team. And it's like, you know, really tight deadlines. But the EA saying, well, actually, we don't know what that is. We've never heard about that thing before. We haven't been involved. Therefore, we're going to basically wrestle together, get into a bit of a stalemate. Nothing really progresses. And actually, that just costs time and money and people's basically morale in terms of, well, actually, I don't want to work for this thing anymore. I don't want to do the best for this company. And this thing just should not exist. You know, there shouldn't be this wrestle. Apologies to any judo fans out there. So for me, the alignment is critical. You know, over my years, there has been this vast cavern between almost the two sides. And I use that term loosely because I don't want there to appear to be sides to this thing. This is really an illustration about, you know, there is, you know, this vast gap between the two that needs to be filled. And there's probably 10, 15, 20 different things that can bridge this gap. You know, I've just listed a few, which are kind of pertinent. You know, for me, one of the reasons is projects are always late and over budget. Software delivery team, it's easier to blame an EA because they can be the new scapegoat. You know, that's quite not the right answer. For me, you know, there's more pertinent things which are really, really relevant to do that. And I kind of go through them one by one. Common sense thinking. This is an interesting one because what I've learned working with kind of EAs is that, you know, they bring this common sense thinking to, you know, a lot of delivery teams and new organizations where they have this real deliver it now, deliver it cheap, quickly mentality or culture, let's say. And the EA can bring some kind of sense and level-headedness to that by saying, actually, the best way to look at that is this, because they're aware of the other things at an enterprise and strategic level that may be going on. You know, for me, that the notion of deliver it fast, deliver it cheap is never really going to go away. But with the kind of the artisan EA in place, actually, it brings a level to that that says, hold on a minute, let's have a discussion. Let's bring that to a different level now. Sharing approach and ideas, you know, this is so critical, I feel, in organizations where, you know, different development teams or delivery teams sometimes are siloed. And actually the EA may be the only link between those teams. So again, they may be involved in conversations or in certain strategy things, and they can share those with those different delivery teams or parts of the business. Makes the world visible. You know, sometimes when you're working in, you know, development teams, you're kind of delivering your product, your service, your world is kind of that thing. That's all you know, that's all you're kind of relevant to. What the EA does is kind of allows those people in that delivery team to kind of see outside of that, which is kind of like the EA world. The suddenly it's like, oh, okay, if I do this or consume this data here or push that data there, it has an impact potentially on, you know, delivery team here, this program over here, this initiative's going on there. So it's really important that, you know, EA can bring that kind of real world, wider world view visible to those specific teams. And I've benefited from that, you know, multiple times. Reducing redundancy kind of goes back to the sharing of approaches and ideas where, you know, it's these siloed behaviors and EA be thinking, well, actually, why are we doing that thing here? But actually, the other team over here is doing that thing too. Actually, the teams aren't talking, communication issue. We can start to remove some of the things around that, and eliminates this shadow on multiple IT teams where we've all fully seen it, where these pockets kind of pop up of people doing things which don't follow, you know, governance rules or any kind of ways of working, where it just kind of happens because, again, this culture of deliver it now, deliver it cheaper, just deliver it cheaply, sorry, just kind of get on and do it. But with the EA's involvement, that hands-on approach to it, actually suddenly these things become eliminated, as I would say. And benefits. So for me, there are benefits, as always, with having this EA involved in the kind of delivery cycle. And there's a few here. There's a strategic view where that constant link to the broad organizational enterprise mission and strategies. Again, without that, you know, the teams are operating a bit of a silo. They're kind of just doing their thing and not really relating to actually what is going on. How does my product, my service, whatever I'm doing relate to that thing? improves interoperability and integrations. I think that's a kind of a no-brainer in terms of the audits we've got here today in terms of technical and what that really means. Enabler for agility. I think Ian mentioned this earlier around the fact of, you know, with that EA kind of embedded with a delivery team, very close to them, understand what's going on, it allows this agility with a small a here to kind of happen where decisions may need to be happening really, really quickly. You know, historically, and going back maybe 15 years or 20, where, you know, decisions would be like, okay, you need to write this paper needs to go up to the EA group needs to look at that, needs to get another sign off. That may take you weeks and weeks and weeks. Modern day society, you know, iterations are so key. You need to get those decisions, those products, enhancements, whatever it may be, out very, very quickly. So having that, you know, that function, you know, really close by, that's on the journey, actually enables agility, so within the team, to actually make decisions, maybe pivot. Every now and again, it's like, well, actually, we need to pivot because of some program situation, who knows, whatever it may be. This is where the EA comes in to really enable that as well. Reduces waste and redundancy. Back to my point about where things are being done multiple times, really allows the EA to see, actually, we're doing this thing multiple times from a more strategic level. Let's look at that. You know, anytime you get an EA involved, you know, classic liner here, improves security and limits technical risk. You know, the EA with his hat on will always identify these things in a very positive way. But the thing about it is, when you make those potential security changes or reduce the risk early on in that kind of development cycle, the costs are less. You know, I've been on multiple projects where the EA is brought in at the end, doesn't go live. That can cost a fortune, sometimes as much as the project costs to deliver and the time as well. So again, there's so many benefits of having kind of the EA involved kind of on the ground with these delivery teams. Again, these are more the kind of the soft areas of it. For me, they're seen as one of the team. Back to my initial slide where, you know, EAs were evil. It's almost like they were not seen as one of us, and we weren't co-creating with them. Suddenly the EA, not say becomes soft in that term, but becomes accessible, and also they become part of what we're creating as a team, as a business, as an organization, not just putting gates up saying you must follow that and then you never see them again. That's not what it's about. Easy buy-in. So, you know, technical people, development people, program people, and EAs have, you know, lots of ideas or challenges around how we need to do something. So for example, you know, a technical lead developer may say, I understand what the roadmap is, what the design and the vision is, but actually I've realized to implement this thing, I'm going to need to do something which doesn't quite follow that. If the enterprise architect's been on that journey, I've seen there's easier buy-in because they understand, oh, okay, now I appreciate why you're doing that and what it means. The friction gets removed and there's an open discussion about it. You know, not the wrestling as you saw, or the judo hold throw you saw, you know, in a couple of slides back. It's actually, they'll look at solutioning rather than actually, no, you need to go and find another way to do that. And there's obviously compromises in that as well. But because you are one team and operate in this really co-creation manner, actually less friction and things get done. And finally here, the team believes, you know, this is the whole delivery team. They believe and understand the great efforts and reasons for an EA. You know, a lot of the time, I know that you guys probably evangelize your roles across organizations, you know, large and small. And sometimes that's good because they see it, but sometimes it doesn't resonate because it's not tangible. But when suddenly the EA is affecting your project in terms of delivery, quality, speed, you know, suddenly they realize it in a tangible form that, oh, I really understand now, not just from a slide that I saw at a presentation. It's more about, I see what it means to my role and my job and why actually we need them as part of this really strong delivery team. And for me, it's all about producing great software. It's all about that. And embedding them within that cycle is key to that success. And I think that is me.
Okay, thanks, Kingsley. Oh, I've skipped ahead. Q&A, final thoughts. We go Q&A actually. No, thanks, Kingsley. That's really good to hear the actual kind of view and the thoughts from someone who's on the receiving end of I suppose, EA services, as it were. I appreciate the fact that you put a model in there. What EA doesn't like a model. And it's very rare that I ever see a presentation where the word architect and agility is used in the same sentence. So, you know, ticking all the boxes for me today, Kingsley. As I say, let's get some Q&A. I've got some questions in from Ian Glossop, actually. He's been quite a few here. And what I'll do is I'll read them out and then we can go through through the questions. I'm going to see if this button works. I don't know what it does. So first question from Ian, he says, isn't it a part of the role of the EA to punch a vague stakeholder thought bubbles? You want AI? Why? What for? Does it make sense? Is it just shiny, shiny fashion? Now, that came in when you were speaking, Gabrielle, so I'll go to you first.
I saw that, yeah. No, and that's an excellent point. And that is exactly what I do. I have to say to people, why, you know, you can't do this. We don't have the data to manage the AI anyway. And B, let's just say exactly what you want to do. Let's come up with a user story. So that's sort of a large part of the job, to do exactly what you're saying there, is to say, let's try and write down exactly what people are thinking and hoping for in their software. And then as Kingsley was saying, sort of collaborating then with the team of people who are going to deliver it. I mean, it's all about that, having good relationships with the dev team and the IT operations desk and all of the people, the communications people, if you've got them, and you know, those sort of people. So yeah, so everybody, so that's that architecture elevator going up and down and saying to, you know, this is what the stakeholder, this is what it means if we're going to do that. There's going to be a comms program, there's going to be a service desk stuff, there's going to be a team outside, there's going to be the cloud people, there's going to be all this, and this is what we're going to have to get involved. It's just a matter of saying, we can't just bring in the magic. It doesn't work like that. So I think you're right.
And your thoughts around that question, Kingsley?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I kind of echo what Gabrielle was saying there, really, around. Oh, have I lost you?
No, you're still there. Have we lost Kingsley?
We've lost Kingsley.
It appears so. Anyway, I'll carry on answering then. I think, certainly from my point of view, and Ian, I'll give you opportunity to talk in a moment as well. I think you're right, it is part of an EA's role, but what greater way to punch a vague stakeholder thought bubbles than to have a great team around you who can help you do that. So I suppose where I'm kind of proposing the Artisan EA, the advantage of it is that not only if you've got a stakeholder comes along with a nice vague request, well, I may not necessarily be the right person to answer that, but actually I could turn around and then maybe somebody sat next to me who actually does know how best to kind of elicit the right response from that stakeholder and you know, understand why or what they're doing. Sorry, Kingsley, we lost you briefly. Do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what happened there. What I was trying to say, I think it's part of the EA role, but it's probably, depending on the organization, it can be part of various kind of people's roles to challenge that. I think, you know, stakeholders will always come with vague thought bubbles, let's say, depending where you're at. I kind of get that many times. You know, I know Ian mentioned the example there about the AI and what you want it for. I think that's always the challenge around that, you know, whether or not you have kind of product owners or product people that kind of can do that as well. But again, for me, it's almost like encouraging that vagueness to drive out what the business should really be doing, and that may involve the EA. So for me, the EA has got a perspective of that, which says, well, actually, based on strategic goals and everything else that goes on, this is where it fits. But a product owner that knows the end client for that particular product or thing it is actually may have a different view. So I think, you know, that is part of the role to kind of, as a sounding block, as I see it, where they can actually have influence and also inform on it too.
Okay, thanks for that. Ian, I've just clicked it, allowed you to talk. Do you want to, any comment on our feedback around that question?
You're on mute, Ian.
Take silence as a no. Next question from Ian. I don't know whether it's a question or a statement. Isn't it the case that software development teams are undisciplined cowboys and EAs are just trying to keep the rebellious teenagers in line? I can see some smiles there already. I suppose I don't know. I look at that and go, I'm not sure it is my role, to be honest. I'm not a line manager. I'm here to actually produce good design and guide that design to hopefully a successful delivery. Maybe I've got some, well, they're actually my stakeholders, so some contentious stakeholders along the way. I've probably got some very nice ones as well. But actually, probably my role as an EA is more to do with how do I work well with my cowboys and development teams and various people to make sure that my design is acceptable and will move forward. You're probably on the receiving end of this, Kingsley. They're your undisciplined cowboys. What would you say?
I don't think I've ever seen them called undisciplined cowboys, but they are, creative force amongst themselves. And I think, it's not, back to your point there, it's not really for the EA to kind of keep the rebellious, I love it, teenagers in line, but it's about, the informing that the EA brings to software development team that allows them to flourish in the thing they need to do. That's back to my kind of co-creation bit, because software devs need to be creative, need to be sometimes impulsive about certain things, but it's always checking back in and actually having that EA alignment, the artisan EA alignment that says, actually I'm thinking about this thing here, help me through this, help me to this design thing, the planning thing, help me through that. But yeah, I love the question.
Yeah. And Gabrielle, any comments from yourself?
Look, I was a software developer for many years, and I never regarded myself as a cowboy. I regarded myself as somebody who was working to a plan, and I worked in agile development for a long time, and I think I was just as keen on collaborating then. And I think if you've got software developers who are going off and doing their own stuff, then that's a management issue. It's not a problem for EAs. So I think there shouldn't be that problem shouldn't happen.
Okay, thank you. Next one again from Ian again. Isn't this a bit backwards if you're not a software business? Shouldn't EA align to what the business want and software development align to what EA want? The business should be the driver, not developers. I'll go to Kingsley first here. I know he works very closely with the business, so.
Yeah, for me, it's the term of the business I see as the end client or the end customer per se. To me, depending on what industry you're in, and obviously I'm fortunate to work in lots of brands, is that it's the end client that really is key to drive that. A lot of software, let's call it devs, align to actually what's happening with the client, what are they doing, what do they want, what's the data telling them, informing them, and that then feeds up into almost back to my co-creation point with the wider team, including the EA, that says, right, actually, how do we need to build this thing that addresses this particular client need or this gap in the market, whatever it may be. So I think it is, it's an involvement of the teams together rather than one particular discipline per se, and depending where you're on and what your business is. And for me, it's all about the end business, end client, whether internal or external, doesn't really matter. That's the focal point for me.
Okay, thank you. And Gabrielle?
I don't have anything more to add, I don't think. So.
I suppose I look at that one, and I agree with Kingsley. It's like, what is the client after, not what the business is after. And I actually am not a big fan of this kind of business technology or business developer kind of terminology, but I kind of get the point. I suppose if I look at that question, and whilst we've talked about software here, I'm not always working with software development and applications. I could be doing some business change. I could be doing something, more deeply technological and that kind of thing. And actually, the EA is there to kind of work with different people. So I might work with business analysis, or I might work with our program teams, or business change, for example, to get to the right answer. And so I don't feel it's the responsibility of any one person or team to communicate with the business in this term or our client. It's a kind of collaborative effort. And I think, again, this is where that artisan EA comes in. They might be at times a channel that you might say, well, actually, let's speak to the client around this because what's going on, but they shouldn't be seen as the mediator effectively between the two. Next question, again from Ian. He's having a good evening this evening, but I appreciate the questions coming in. It's great to get this kind of level of feedback. Is well known that rework is exponentially expensive. Better to get your design governance sorted so you don't try to implement poor designs. Gabrielle, you seem to suffer from this occasionally.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because what you can have is, especially when you let the business drive what you want to do, is they often don't really know what they could do. So there's kind of a bit of an overlap between what we were just talking about and this. Excuse me. Is that I
think we lost Gabrielle this time. Oh.
Maybe it heard me coughing and it said, you better go home. Have a drink. Anyway, I think what can happen with us is that, like, you know, the business, you've got your requirements, you've got your user stories, it's all going well, you sort of implement it, and then they use it. I say they, I mean, I don't mean to sort of be so divisive as that, but then the users get to use it, and they say, oh, it'd be really good if it could do something else. So, you know, that can happen, and that can be, and it can result in significant rework, especially if they hadn't understood something that happens at a fundamental sort of layer. You know, you say, like, remember in the olden days when we used to do websites and they'd say, oh, can you just change it to red? And it was a real pain in the bum changing things to red. You know, it seems like it should be easy, but it wasn't. I mean, that's easier now, but other stuff is still fundamental. There's still sort of platform level stuff that is quite difficult to change. I mean, if users don't really understand what they're dealing with, that can cause a major issue in rework. And it's really difficult to sort of cover up for that, especially if you've sort of gone in with the proposal early on to say, I'd like to do this kind of system, and it gets knocked back because it's too expensive. And then when it comes time to delivery, it turns out that the only way to do what people wanted was to do the stuff you'd proposed in the beginning that was too expensive. So, you know, I guess you get in this sort of bind of what is acceptable amounts of rework, and, you know, and that's where that's what Agile was supposed to sort of fix up. But you can't get past the fact that some stuff has to be there before you can start iterating, don't you? And if that stuff is wrong, then you get into the expensive reuse. So yeah, I agree with you, Ian. It's a real nuisance when you have to rework stuff.
I think, no, when I look at that, and again, I suppose where I'm coming with this particular style of architecture is, I agree, yeah, rework is potentially expensive. Make sure you got design governance right, but also you can spend too long in the design side of stuff as well, and so it has a negative impact there. I'm a kind of very big fan of kind of being a bit more experimental, and so again, looking at this is like, why spend a lot of time in design when perhaps you could go off and do an experiment around something, or you could give could be one of your developers, because of your business change, to go and try something different. You might time bound them, might say, you know, you've got 2 weeks, you've got 4 weeks. Go and have a look at it and then come back. And actually that could inform your design in such a way that you might go down a different path. And certainly some of my previous experience is actually some of the best ideas have come from where somebody's kind of gone, oh, I've got, you know, they've gone and locked themselves away for 2 weeks and come back and said, here you go, here's something, and it's going to go, oh, actually, I never even thought of that. It's changed how I've approached it. But there's still a design process there. So you still don't do an experiment in the dark. You still have a process around it. But I suppose it's rethinking what you mean by design governance, rather than these kind of traditional, do the design, take it to the TDA, put it through the project board, put it kind of, and be a bit more flexible about it. I don't know what your thoughts are around that, Kingsley.
No, very similar. My thing around that was about that flexibility and kind of being experimental where you can, because you're right, you know, you're not going to know everything. So kind of what Gabrielle said as well, you kind of need to have something and put it out there. If you put too much out there, then actually that cost just becomes ridiculous to do that. So, you know, getting that change early and getting that involvement just, you know, limits that.
Okay. Thank you. I don't know if Ian, you put a note where you couldn't quite unmute yourself. I don't know whether you want to try again.
Let me unmute you.
Going to ask to unmute button. Let's see if we get some feedback from Ian.
How's that?
Yep, we can hear
Does
you.
that work?
Yep.
2 buttons. Have to press 2 buttons.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. It's all about that sort of fast fail thing. It's all about getting that communication working. So yeah, don't do too much up front. Try stuff out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, throw it away and take a different tack. So yes, yeah, I think EAs have a role in that to play nicely with the dev teams, basically, rather than just trying to impose their will upon them, which never works.
And I noticed you obviously agreed with Gabrielle about the communication thing. You mentioned around sort of software from the open market. You know, there's off-the-shelf solutions which are a little bit different. What was there a particular thought you had in mind when you were saying that?
So you're starting from the position of you've got an in-house dev team. What if you don't? You don't have a dev team at all because you don't need one. You're just buying all your software from the open market and then putting bits together in an integration type approach. Yeah, you don't have to assume that the answer to any solution is to write some software, because often it isn't.
Well, I know I work in a law firm, and we have a few developers that do sort of, you know, frilly bits around the edges, and but they're not really developing software as such. And that's certainly the case for us. And I think there's a question, I don't know if you've noticed, Ian, but in the chat part, there's some other questions too. And Joe has said about the ITIL suppliers and, that is something that we deal with is what's the difference between a business application and a software component that we purchased and that we have to manage. And that's the sort of direction that we're moving towards, is looking, how do we sort of manage these business applications, many of which are spreadsheets, by the way. So, you know, there's a lot of spreadsheets, and sadly, and sort of, you know, and spreadsheet extracts from data sources that are then fed into Power BI, you know, reports and, you know, hilarious stuff like that. So, you know, this is where you can get down. Now, I think there's another bit that I don't think comes in under any of these, any of your EA personas, Ian. It's when the low code, no code people come in some sort of pseudo operations team that's not in the IT department, but some part of the business has got their own people in because they don't want to go through IT. And they've kind of developed some sort of workflowy type stuff, and or even just using Power Automate or something like that, just part of their, you know, Microsoft license perhaps. And there's no control over this stuff. And, you know, people are making business decisions with it. I think that's going to be a real challenge to how to integrate that stuff into the general thing, especially like if you move to having some sort of, you know, enterprise data warehouse or something with, you know, on the journey towards getting that, you've still got these, you know, extracts from databases stored in spreadsheets that people are connecting to and emailing around and stuff like that. So, you know, I think this is the sort of next frontier of challenge for enterprise architecture, is the business, you know, how we're going to work with people who are doing quite sophisticated stuff with workflow systems. I mean, there's some pretty excellent ones that you can buy, but you know, the repetition, the copy and pasting of these things, the sort of slight sort of lack of control that implies, is going to be quite interesting, I think.
Okay, thanks, Gabrielle. And Kingsley, I've certainly worked with you on some products which perhaps aren't fully what you'd call off the shelf, but are certainly beyond just software development. What's your kind of take on where architecture fits in that space?
I think I was going to come on the back of what Gabrielle said there as well, in terms of the evolution of kind of what's happening. And I think back to your point there around, you know, where these things off this, you know, commercial products off the shelf will fit, because there's more and more of that in terms of, well, actually, there's a big investment around software development, quality, and all those kind of things there. Actually, this product is there. I just want it, bolt it in, do some integrations, perhaps if I need to customize it from a UI level, perhaps, and then get off you go. And I think that's where the EA really needs to be really close around these different business units, let's say, or opcos, whatever they may be, to understand actually what is happening and set some kind of light model and governance around, framework around that, so people can actually do their jobs, who are using these wonderful tools and spreadsheets and everything else that they historically have done. But actually, there's some level of control with it, because you're right. My thing, it's going to evolve. It's going to get at a faster pace now, and the way that the businesses now need to bring capability very, very, very quickly. There cannot be this real hard stop gate that prevents them from doing it, because suddenly they become, well, actually, what's the EA really about? Because we need to, adapt really, really quickly now, especially when, for commercial companies where they need to get stuff to market, for example, or they need to respond to a pandemic or whatever it may be, who knows? Actually, these things become more and more to the floor, to the front even, around, or actually, how do we start to use them, but don't go really kind of Wild West on it type approach for me. And that, I think, is a challenge.
Yep. Okay. And I think, I know somebody in the chat was talking about how does it kind of fit into ITIL world, and that we're a bit more regulated, I suppose. I think with these personas, I'm not trying to say this type of architect fits all situations. It's kind of a flex for them. I think there is a place there, because I think even if you take something like ServiceNow, which does support ITIL, or could be like a Salesforce for CRM, there's still an element there of configuration. So it's kind of like, well, how do I move beyond the kind of software selection thing? Okay, the scope of changes is different, but actually doesn't prevent you working with the ServiceNow developers or the service desk transition teams. Actually, if it's ServiceNow, it's more likely the end users to adapt that particular software product to fit the organization, much the way that you might do software development as well. So it kind of, I think it fits there, but yeah, you probably kind of have to look at it from a slightly different view to do it. We've got a question from somebody about business architecture. Personally, I kind of see architecture and these kind of different, whether it's enterprise, data, business, etc. We use kind of similar skills. The question was, how does the business architect, especially since business architects don't exist at all companies, fall into or overlap with the Artisan EA? You could probably answer this in a couple of ways. Is if you see the Artisan EA as being somebody who works with software teams and those kind of artisans, as it were, then whether there's that kind of overlap about actually you still got to understand what the business is looking for from a delivery point of view. You might be looking more at kind of, does this deliver against business model? How might this be accelerating? Could be managing risk, could be actually about how does it make more profit for the organization, generate revenue for us. So we certainly see it there, maybe a slightly different role played, but I can definitely see it. But actually, we should probably also consider that architecture isn't just about developing software. It isn't just about off-the-shelf stuff. It's actually, well, in this space, how do we might want to rapidly modify our operating models, or we might want to work in a different way. And so actually, you actually need something like a business architect in there to understand how your teams work together, or how your operating model might need to adapt or flex to emerging markets as well. And in that case, the kind of artisans they'd be working with are potentially your kind of business SMEs, your business change people, slightly different group, but actually I think the approach is kind of still applicable. I don't, Gabrielle, do you got any comments on that? You're nodding away.
Well, I mean, I just think that if you kind of got a handle on your capability model, that's business architecture, sort of usually a deliverable from them. But I mean, anyone can do it, can't they? I mean, there's lists of capabilities for various different businesses.
Careful
and anyway, you could make, hey, what's that?
Careful what you say.
Yeah, I know. But, you know, like with all of these things, you can sort of, I mean, someone makes it up in the first place, don't they? And then gradually it gets better. Why can't you make it up yourself? You can. And you can just sort of say, these are the capabilities that we're agreed that we're working with here. And so then you can sort of focus people that way, because capabilities are cross-functional, aren't they? So, you know, everyone's got reporting, all the different divisions. So, you know, you've got some capability across reporting. Everybody's got, you know, I don't know, whatever it is you've got all these different things that your organization does. And, you know, new business, the way that you take in new business for whatever you do, and how you have to sort of do some sort of checking that it's fine to do that business and things. You know, everyone does that sort of stuff. So, you know, I think that is enough as an artisan EA to keep you sort of aligned with any business architect, whether there is a business architect or not. You have to take on a bit of it. And if you're just going to take on a bit of business architecture, it's looking at what the organizational's business capabilities are, and how that links to the software that you've bought. You can sort of then, you know, look to see how much money are we spending on all of these things, and does that map back to our company's values? I'm sure, you know, all companies have some published values, and they have, you know, a mission statement. So how do these things relate to that? And so where are we spending? If, you know, if we've got a, you know, a mission, you know, a value of sort of, you know, collaboration, are we collaborating? Or is that just some sort of thing that people are saying? Exactly how are we collaborating? Exactly how are we excellent? You know, how everyone has the same ones, don't they? And so you have to say, how is this work that we're doing contributing to, you know, how we deal with our clients and our excellent service and our, you know, fabulous collaboration. So for me, that's the element of business architecture that most sort of general purpose EAs who aren't one thing, you know, who are trying to do a bit of everything would want to be focusing on that.
Okay. And from your experience, Kingsley, I don't know how much interaction you have with business architects, but I know you obviously work with a lot of small companies and that kind of thing. What value do you see in terms of architecture working and supporting this kind of approach?
I think the value is really, you know, the life cycle of whatever the thing is that's happening at that time. I think it's, you know, large companies, small companies, and medium-sized organizations, you know, the value is there in terms of having that architect from a business perspective, and also the software perspective, you know, integrated with that journey or that life cycle thing, whatever it may be it business change, be it actually a software dev thing, or anything kind of in between. I think that brings to me that almost that real focus that everyone knows kind of the path and the journey. There's this kind of, you know, not to say it's always a North Star, but there's a point that we're trying to get to, and actually keeping everybody kind of in check for that particular end point as well. Again, this comes back to the strategic point, kind of what you're saying there around, you know, the values and all these things there. It's like actually looking at that and saying, actually, we're on this journey. This is what we need to do, and keeping everyone kind of in balance at the same time, but not kind of just being kind of pompous about it. It's like, well, actually, it's a collaboration thing, and we're on this journey to achieve X or achieve Y. So I see that valuable from, as I said, the big organizations, but also the small organizations where people wouldn't think it's important or relevant, but actually it really is, and really valuable as well.
Yeah, and I noticed Ian's just popped something into the thing about actually there's other value there from things like, you know, taking your operating model innovation, bringing that through program management, business process change. Also, you can start looking at things like cost of ownership, business benefits, etc. And I think when you were talking about value there, Kingsley, I suddenly went, oh, actually, hold on, you've got that kind of, well, actually, how do I respond to the market? How's this going to change? What capabilities might I need around this? So there's all, I think, yeah, I think that business architect can operate in quite a similar way, or as an artisan EA, it's just their focus is on business change and how they deliver it there. Just looking, I think we're now out of questions. I can't see anything just looking in the chat. I suppose the only one here, there was a couple of comments about testing being expensive. I know we talked about, you know, rework being expensive. I suppose testing is part of that rework process, but I think we've covered everything that I can see. I suppose hold on. Question
Yes.
for you, Gabrielle. Was it on the 10th floor?
Something like that. I just made up those numbers. See?
Need to move it down. You can modify your picture for the next one, can't you?
Yeah. No, it's applicable to everything. You've got to do. I think if you haven't got the capability model, you're missing a trick, and you need to sort of, because it just focuses people back on a question. You go, surveying, that's come up for me lately. We do a lot of surveys in our organization, and we've got a number of different tools to do surveys in. Why? And now people are trying to make them up in Microsoft Forms, and you think, yeah, well, that's not going to be that secure, is it? Because you're going to be now doing stuff with SharePoint. So it's it's interesting to go along and say, we've got this capability of surveying clients and staff as well. And where does that data get stored, and what are we going to do with it over the long term? How are we going to manage it? It's a capability. Someone can be looking at that and managing it. And that's just something really little. But it's amazing how much money you can spend on this really little stuff, because people don't, think about it very much. So,
okay, definitely. Well, I think, as I say, we've cleared up all the questions. Probably worth going around with closing comments, and then we can finish off. So, you were already talking, Gabrielle. Let's come back to yourself. Do you want to give some closing comments around this?
Oh yeah, well, I mean, like in all of these aspects of enterprise architecture, you just have to fit in with your organization, and if you find yourself in the role of being an artisan EA, I mean, it's collaboration. It really is. You have to sort of fit in with developers, with some sort of stakeholders and things, and you have to and you just have to do it. You're not up in an ivory tower. You're not kind of in some governance, some sort of technical governance dream of control or whatever it is you want to do, but you have to be out there working with everybody, and so it's a collaborative role. So it's a good one if you like collaborating.
Okay. Anything from you, Kingsley?
Yeah, I think my closing words are around accessibility in terms of being accessible as an EA, but also, to repeat, the collaboration part. I think, being embedded and co-creating with, speaking about development teams as I was earlier, I think those are the key things around, being out there, being in there, being involved and on the journey with the team.
Okay. Thanks for that, Kingsley. I think for me, it's been really an interesting conversation this evening. I think having the perspective of Kingsley has been great, and the perspective of Gabrielle in terms of carrying out this role. I think the purpose of these talks, of this series of talks, was actually to kind of challenge the kind of traditional thoughts about what enterprise architect is and how we act, and bring some kind of fresh perspective to it, which hopefully encourages people to maybe work in a slightly different way, reconsider how they may want to work as well. Maybe even I'm kind of quite keen to encourage people to become enterprise architects. I find it quite a challenge sometimes to sell the role, but I'm not, I really like it, so I'm not going to, I can sell it to myself. If you want to carry on staying connected, I say on Twitter, we've got our BCS EASG group, and we're on LinkedIn, and there's the BCS website. We meet weekly, monthly. So if you are interested in what else the Enterprise Architect Specialist Group does, please contact myself or one of the members through the thing. I would say we'd really love to hear from you. And actually, if you're not a member of the BCS, have a look into it and see if that's the sort of thing you're interested. Otherwise, I just want to sort of thank everybody for this evening. Thanks, Kingsley and Gabrielle, for being my speakers, and thanks for those who have attended. And I think it's been a very good evening. So thank you all. Okay, good night.